thank you all for attending tonight. My name is Cliff KEHELEY. I'm the city manager for the city of Mesquite, and tonight is our information session for the upcoming tax election. And the primary focus of this election is for voters to consider keeping the current tax rate. This current tax rate is based on a budgetary need that will bring in revenue to add more public safety, more street and alley repairs, and more security of our computer infrastructure. We'll have time for questions during the program, and we have several staff members here from our budget office and the city manager's office to answer any questions that you might have. So we'll be here as long as there are questions to be answered. Just as a reminder, the election is set for November 2nd. It is the same election day as our city council election, and early voting starts next Monday. And so we're planning on making sure we're out with the public over the next few weeks to answer any questions and make sure this information is out there. So like I said before, the city council adopted a budget in August that included additional staffing for public safety. It included additional funding for street repairs, and it also included a program for a cybersecurity program to protect the city's security infrastructure. This budget was passed using the same tax rate that we currently have, and the tax rate will increase the revenue that the city receives from the taxpayers due to the values of homes and commercial properties increasing in the city. And you may be asking, why are we having an election over this matter? Back a few years ago, the state legislature capped the amount of revenue that cities can collect from property taxes to whatever you received the previous year plus 3.5%. And so this budget exceeds that 3.5%. And so the Proposition A that is on the ballot is for Mesquite voters to vote for or against the proposition. And the easiest way to look at this is not to really focus on the rate because the rate is the same. It's the revenues that rate generates. And so because the revenue is capped, the council needed to fund these programs and could not do that under the 3.5% cap. And the budget was developed based on the fact that Mesquite's growing. Census put our population at 150,000 people. We're over 40 square miles in area, and we have a lot of new development coming. We have possibly about 10,000 lots on the ground being built over the next 15 to 20 years. And so this budget was designed to try to stay ahead of that growth. Typically, revenues generated by houses and commercial buildings pay for the services that are provided. We just did not want to get behind the curve. And so, and it was also based on the needs that citizens have told us. Every other year we do a citizen survey, and we ask questions about the priorities that citizens want to see the city services provide. And 62% of the respondents to our last survey indicated public safety as a high priority, and 66% rated streets and street maintenance as a very high priority. And then basically this budget comes down to how do we maintain the infrastructure and how do we police our community. So in the budget proposal, we include 5 new police officers. Currently we have 248 sworn officers, and by charter we are required to have one police officer per every 1,000 residents. So that 248 right now puts us ahead of the charter requirement. But if you can imagine the number of houses being built at the exceptional rate that they are, our population is going to increase rather quickly. And we don't want to be in a position where we're behind on that number. But the real story is Mesquite's not only growing, but we're an older city, and we're in a metroplex that has a lot of crime issues. And crime does not look at borders and city limits. And so what we are hearing from residents is that there needs to be more visible police on the streets. And visibility of police is a deterrent. We have several programs that have proven that if a police officer is in an area, and we use data to identify where police officers need to be, and if we can focus those officers in that area, we see a distinct decrease in crime. And those are through deployments of officers and assignment of officers into those areas. But we can't do that all of the time with the current officers we have, because they will be responding to calls. So the more officers we have, the more we can be visible and the more we can respond to the needs. Just for your information, during a typical day, we have 12 police officers patrolling Mesquite. In the evenings, that number increases to 16 to 24 based on the historic call volumes we have. I mentioned that we had 248 police officer positions. Currently, we have 13 vacancies of officers. We have about 26 officers in training right now, but there are 13 vacancies. And if you're familiar with the labor shortage that most employers are dealing with, we're feeling that right now as well. In the police department with 13 vacancies, most every other city has a similar number of vacancies in their police department. So we're all recruiting from the same pool of people who want to serve as police officers. And we want to make sure that we are competitive with our neighboring cities. And so part of this budget also includes competitive pay for our police and firefighters. And we want to make sure that, that number, it's an ever-changing number. That number is always going up. Every city is trying to put themselves in a position to have better pay. So we're in constant competition with our neighbors. And so that if we aren't able to keep up with them, we'll fall further and further behind, and it's harder for us to keep up. In addition to the 5 officers, we have 10 firefighters included in this proposed budget. In 2020, we responded to over 19,000 calls for service. That's EMS and fire calls in fire. It was 406 structure fires and about 14,000 EMS calls. And our goal is to respond to those in around 5 minutes. And so with those 10 officers, or 10 firefighters, we are hoping to staff apparatus fully in order to increase our ability to respond. Currently, we have 2 stations that have apparatus that are only staffed with 3-man crews. National fire standards call for a 4-man crew when responding to structure fires. And so with those 3-man operations, if there's a structure fire, they have to respond in tandem with another unit. And so that decreases the number of calls that we can respond to. And it's also a safety factor. When our firefighters go into a structure fire, it's really, you need 2 people on the inside helping each other, and you also need 2 people on the outside. So that 4-man engine is vital for firefighter safety. And again, it allows us to deploy that apparatus differently so we can respond to different calls. So we're not having to send 2 at one time, we can spread out. One of the other components of this is staffing a unit called an attenuator. And we're blessed to have the interstates running through Mesquite. It helps us with economic development, but it also requires us to respond to a lot of accidents and incidents on the highway. And so currently, when we go out there, we have to protect that work zone. And what we're doing is we're taking a $800,000 fire truck and parking it to be basically a roadblock to protect our firefighters and police officers and the people involved in the incident. With this attenuator, it is basically designed to be a large roadblock. You've probably seen them in work zones. It's basically a flatbed truck with a large bumper and cushion on it. And this budget includes staffing to run an attenuator 24 hours a day. What that does is that frees up that apparatus that's used as a blocker and those crews so they can respond to other calls. So it increases our response time. We're not having to pull someone from another district to respond to a call. But again, it also provides additional manpower to put out cones to help clean up the accident site and make sure we can get it cleared and keep people safe at the same time. And again, we're also running into the same problem with firefighters when it comes to hiring. Labor shortage has created a competitive level amongst area cities to attract firefighters, and additional pay will help keep us in a competitive mix with area cities and their firefighters. And I'm sure you probably, when you drove here, you probably hit one or two not speed bumps, but potholes. And we're very familiar with the conditions of the streets in Mesquite. And a lot of that has to do with our age. While we're growing in certain areas, we're also aging. And our streets are just not holding up as long as they should. A lot of that has to do with the droughts we've experienced over the past decade. Heat deteriorates the concrete and it dries up the soil under the streets. You add that on to water from rain and the moisture from the last 2 years that we've had exceptionally wet weather. And so that contraction and expansion of the soil just tears up our streets, and any patches that we make to temporarily repair things get washed out in every rainstorm. So the rainstorm we had last night washed out a good number of the patches that we've made that we put in place just to give us time to go make permanent repairs. So this budget includes an additional $750,000 for street and alley repair. This isn't for new streets. This is just for repairs. And we have you may remember the bond program that we adopted a few years ago for residential streets. These funds are designed to affect the streets that are in better condition than the ones that we're addressing with the bond program. We want to try to keep streets from getting to the worst of the worst that we're fixing with that other program. Plus, we just need to continue to add more and more dollars each year to fix alleys. Alleys are deteriorating just as fast as streets, and a portion of that money will be used to fund our alley crews with materials to go out and do more alleys. And the other thing a lot of people don't realize is that the city has a dependence on technology and a network infrastructure. Fire and police have their 911 system and their mapping system, but code enforcement, finance, our health department, pretty much every operation in the city has some sort of network that we depend on. We also obtain a lot of personal information from residents due to our water billing system and our court system. There's a lot of personal information on there. And more hackers are attacking cities trying to obtain that information or just hold us hostage and request a ransom and hold our operations at bay. So what this program does is it provides for an outside consultant that has expertise in cybersecurity to monitor our systems 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. And they will identify intrusions, they will analyze our network and find those vulnerabilities to really protect those systems. And this budget also includes an additional person to manage that contract. We want to make sure we have our full attention and can make sure that no one gets into our system or gets your information. And one of the more common questions we receive is, how is this going to impact a homeowner? And so with the current valuations from DCAD, looking at the average home value in Mesquite, average homeowner is going to experience about a $10 a month increase in their property taxes. And if you are a senior, if you're over 65 and you've completed the proper forms, you will not experience any increase because you've got a freeze on your taxes. And so the council wanted to make sure that when we selected a tax rate, that it was not something that would overburden residents. And so that's why the tax rate, keeping it the same, keeps it at that $10 a month impact. The other question is, what happens if this does not pass? And so, and this is the difficult part, because we start talking about tax rates versus revenue. And so if the election does not pass, the budget will have to be based on what's called the voter-approved tax rate, which is the revenues we collected, the tax rate that generates the same revenues from this past budget year plus 3.5%. So the real difference comes down to how much revenue we get. So without the election passing, the city will generate about $1.5 million in new revenue, and that's purely from increased values of property. So the proposed tax rate of 0.70862 will generate about $5.4 million. So really the difference between the election tax rate and the voter-approved tax rate is about $3.9 million. So if that wasn't enough, we have a video to kind of further explain this, and once the video's ended, we'll wrap up and we'll answer any questions. So please enjoy the video.
City of Mesquite tax election. In recent community surveys, Mesquite residents expressed that public safety, streets, and infrastructure were their top priorities. 66% of citizens stated maintenance of city streets was a very high priority. 62% of citizens stated quality police and fire services was a high priority. Public safety and street maintenance were ranked by citizens as the biggest issues Mesquite will face in the next 5 years. Overview of the tax election. The Mesquite City Council unanimously approved the fiscal year 2021-2022 budget, which keeps the city property tax rate the same as last year. The City of Mesquite's new budget includes additions for public safety, city streets, and cybersecurity. Additions include 15 new police and fire positions, more funding for street and alley maintenance, and better protection of electronic data. While the property tax rate will remain the same as last year, because of increased property values, the city will see increased revenues. This is how the city proposes to pay for these additional services. State law requires that Mesquite voters approve this year's tax rate, which exceeds the 3.5% voter approval tax rate. Proposition A. Approving the ad valorem tax rate of 0.70862 per $100 valuation in the city of Mesquite, Texas for the current year, a rate that is 0.04302 higher per $100 valuation than the voter approval tax rate of the city of Mesquite, Texas, for the purpose of increasing fire and police staffing levels and competitive pay for fire and police personnel, and increasing funding for alley and street maintenance. Last year, the ad valorem tax rate in the city of Mesquite, Texas was 0.70862 per $100 valuation. Proposition A will be on the November ballot for Mesquite voters to vote for or against the proposition. Early voting, October 18th through the 29th. Election Day, November 2nd. If Proposition A is approved by voters, how might this election impact residents and individuals over 65 years of age? If Proposition A is approved by voters, the average homeowner would pay about $10 more per month in city taxes based on the average property value in Mesquite. The tax rate would not impact property owners who have qualified for the age 65 or older homestead exemption with their property appraiser. How will the revenue generated from Proposition A be allocated? Proposition A will provide revenue for the approved budget. It allocates funds for 5 additional Mesquite police officer positions to increase neighborhood patrols, plus competitive pay increases for officers that serve the community. 10 additional Mesquite Fire Department positions, which will provide faster response times and increase public safety. $750,000 in additional funding for city streets and alley repairs, and funding to improve security from cyber attacks on city computers that have sensitive data and access to operations, as well as the public's personal information. For information on the tax election, voting dates, voting locations, and more, please visit cityofmesquite.com/2021 tax election.
And just to wrap up, there are other things included in the budget that are not typically shown. They're a little bit smaller dollar items, but one of the things that we're really pleased to introduce is a health scan program for our firefighters and police officers. We want to make sure that when they're on the scene that they have, we make sure that they're healthy as well as safe. And this program will provide full body scans and physicals for all firefighters and police officers. There's also a safety patrol or program for the Peachtree entertainment area, the area around the AMC movie theater and restaurants. We've had a recent rash of gatherings there and that have resulted in some violent crimes. And so this program will add some additional patrol time and cameras and other security features to make that safer for those people who are enjoying that area. It also includes an SRO for the new Vanguard High School, and it also increases pay in certain areas to provide competitive pay for other positions that are non-public safety that are, again, part of the ever-increasing pay levels to attract employees to do field work like solid waste, utilities, and streets. And so the election dates again are early voting is October 18th through the 29th. Election day is November 2nd. And there is a website that has more information, all of the frequently asked questions, and hopefully some of the questions you asked tonight or something that we haven't been asked, and we can add those to the frequently asked questions. And at this time, we'll take questions. I will ask that you go to the microphone to ask your questions so the people who are watching on the video can hear your question. Or if you're not comfortable doing that, I'll just repeat the question. So we're ready for questions if you have any. Yes, sir.
I have a couple of questions. There has been the last, I'd say, 2 to 5 years maybe, annexation of a lot of property, and you spoke to 10,000 additional lots that are being built on. This obviously is to help curb some of that and help patrol some of that area and provide services out there until those properties become part of the, part of the tax revenues. That's one of my concerns. Obviously, the city needs to get out in front of this. I don't quite understand why it's an expansion, but It's not my purview. I'm a citizen, and I vote. But I'm a little concerned about that. The other thing is the way the tax is increased. You're saying that the tax rate won't increase, but the property values will be reassessed and increased.
The property values have already been assessed by DCAD, and those were the tax statements that you received earlier this summer. So DCAD does the valuations before we set the budget, and we base our budget numbers off those appraisals.
Now, with that said, I pay county. We obviously pay county tax.
Mm-hmm.
You know, is that appraisal different than the county? I mean,
No.
I'm talking. Okay.
Yeah, the city, school, county, the hospital district, and the community college district all base their tax assessments on your assessed value.
Through the
That one value.
I don't. It won't hurt me because obviously I'm disqualified from this for obvious reasons. I'm a senior and I have a homestead exemption. But I'm just concerned about the sudden expansion and then just being able to handle it. But I appreciate and I understand the city have to get out in front of this, and I hope the citizens feel the same way and will able to support this, and hopefully going forward we can take care of this. And I know I'm with the Mesquite Citizens Police Academy, so I understand the situation with the police officers. I don't volunteer as much as I should have. I've got grandkids and I've got other elderly parents that I help. So, but I understand and I appreciate you having this open forum. Oops, sorry. Sound like my dog. Anyway, but I just wanted to thank you for your time and I appreciate all the information you provided this evening.
And I appreciate you bringing up the growth and the expansion of the city and ultimately the citizens who are currently here will benefit from the values that new growth brings. And just we know that there is just a period of time where we don't want to get having to provide services that are not the same quality. We don't want to take a dip, and that's what this budget was truly meant to be.
You want to make sure that everything's funded appropriately, and I understand that.
Do you have a question?
I'm not sure it's something that can be addressed here, but I live in the South Peninsula community.
Yes, ma'am.
Just a few miles down. How does the police department determine which areas are going to be patrolled more heavily? So if they add the officers, how do I know my community is going to get more coverage?
We are a data-driven organization, and so that's what we're trying to avoid. Right now, we are deploying units to the really hot spots. So if there's a catalytic converters theft has exploded the past year, and so in neighborhoods where we see 2 or 3 occur in one night, we know that there's potentially going to be 4 or 5 over the next couple of weeks. So we'll shift our deployments into those areas where we see those hot spots. But we do patrol the entire city, even all of those areas south of I-20. We are out there on a daily basis in multiple patrols. We do it by beats. The idea is to put more officers on those beats when times are busier. So if we do have a few calls, we can have more officers so we're not reducing the amount of people who are available to respond to calls. So that's how I would look at it, is not that we're going to assign people to specific areas. It's more officers will be available to respond should something happen, and then be available to do that proactive patrolling and be there and be present to deter crime as well.
And I guess with the addition of additional officers, I mean, would there be more focus on prevention and not just response?
Exactly. Yeah, our hope is that police officers spend about half their time doing proactive patrols. And we can't do that, Friday nights kind of throws that out of whack. It's just a lot busier in town on Friday nights. But for the most part, officers should only be responding to calls 50% of their time. And that's our target number. And with more officers, we're able to do those things. So with proactive time, they're able to go to neighborhoods and talk with residents, find out what's going on. They're able to do radar checks in areas where we've got speeding complaints, and just in general, just be more present.
I have a comment to what the subject she just brought up. Is there any assistance from any of the county sheriff's department, Dallas County or Kaufman County, relative to that? If an officer can't get there immediately, I mean, obviously it's a concern to her and her neighborhood.
We haven't been in a situation where we've needed to depend on another agency to help us to respond to calls. If there is a critical incident, then we have arrangements called mutual aid. And typically that's used for fire. If we have a large fire in the northern part of town, something happens in the southern part of town, we'll call Forney or Seagoville or Balch Springs, and they'll come and assist. So we've never been in the situation where we haven't been able to respond to a serious call. Some calls, like a noise complaint, which is a lower priority, sometimes take a little bit longer to respond to. But we've never been in a situation where we've needed any other cities to come help us patrol.
I think she said something about 15 miles. I mean,
A few miles.
Few miles, yeah.
well, 15 miles, 15 minutes,
Yeah.
How about fire stations or even a police substation or something like that? I mean, is that?
Yeah, for fire stations, we do have one planned for south of I-20 in the Kaufman County area down the road. And the developers in those areas have funds that are placed upon, or requirements. They are going to help fund the construction of those to limit the impact on existing residents. So the new residents will be paying for the station. And so we will have another fire station down south. That'll be Station 8. Eventually, once the entire city reaches its build-out state, we probably will need a Station 9. That's what the numbers show us. When it comes to substations, that concept is moving away because we really don't want police officers in a static location just waiting for a call. We want them in the neighborhoods. And so they're fully equipped with computers and communication to do everything they would need to do at their desk that they can do in their car. And that's why you'll see them sometimes sitting in a church parking lot, or they may be in a grocery store, and you may think, well, why are they sitting? They should be driving. Well, a lot of times they're doing their paperwork, but they're also being present in an area where we know that there may have been some shoplifting or some catalytic converters. So that's how they kind of provide that visibility and do some of their paperwork.
So future budgets, how is this going to affect future budgets? I mean, you're saying this year is more, the state law goes 3.5% of the previous year's rate or revenue?
It's revenue. So next year, the 2023 budget will be based on the revenues we obtained with this current budget plus 3.5%. And it's our expectation that we'll be able to manage the growth over the next few years within that if the election passes. And so if it doesn't, it just puts us on a slower pace to add the officers and firefighters. So we will still add them. It's just going to be at a slower pace. And again, our staff is here till any questions are asked and are done. So, but I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. And again, we encourage you to visit our website if you have any additional questions or anything that after you leave tonight. But thank you for being here.